Hi, and welcome to the third series of the Fancy a Brew podcast, talking about adventure, pushing your boundaries, and chasing dreams of underwater exploration. The podcast is supported by Dive Life Scuba Diving Centre, the one-stop shop for all your recreational and technical dive gear and training needs, boasting a 5-star service and their own in-house gas blending and equipment servicing department. For more information, take a look at their website, divelife.co.uk, or on Instagram and Facebook. In this series, I'm going to be chatting to some of the divers I've met along my scuba dive adventures in the last couple of years, ranging from boat skippers, stunt performers, and underwater explorers. So if that sounds like your cup of tea, grab yourself a brew, sit back, and enjoy this week's episode. Right then, so Jessica Irwin, thanks for coming on Fancy a Brew podcast. I came across you through being on Robbie's podcast a couple of times. I think you've been on quite a few, haven't you, as well?
Yeah, I've been on twice.
Yeah. When I got asked to go on it, I hadn't heard of it before, and even to this day, I think it's I like it, but it's the strangest conversation. You go on to listen to someone about a particular subject, and they don't talk about that at all. They just go off on random tangents, don't they?
Yeah, it's fun though, because when I first got asked to go on, it was just he just randomly messaged me on Instagram, and just because of my job and the nature of my work and all the really random stuff that's out there about aliens and conspiracies, I get messaged fairly often, and so I when people are like, yeah, I want to talk about this. I'm like, I don't know. But I went on and I listened, and it's just such a fun conversation, and
Yeah.
it's a really enjoyable hour. And yeah, I don't mind it. I had a great time. I love talking to him. But yeah, you spend very little amount of time talking about what you intend to, but I think it's still super fun. So
Yeah, this was the first one I'd ever been on, and I was so nervous, and I'd done a prep, I wrote a little sheet all about me, thinking that's all it was going to be, and it wasn't at all. We just started talking about shark porn and the most random stuff that you could come out with, and I tried to, although I've listened to your episodes before, I wanted to listen to them the last couple of days, so I was on my Apple podcast putting in Out of the Blank podcast, and it wouldn't come up. There's a problem between US and UK relations, I think, with podcasts at the minute. I just couldn't find it. So I was messaging Robbie going, listen, what's going on? Why are you not on Apple? Because I don't listen to Spotify. I can't find it. And he's like, oh no, it's there, look. And I just couldn't. But then they've done an update today. So I've got him this afternoon.
nice.
Far too late to listen to him. So tell us a little bit. Well, first of all, have you got a brew?
I do, and I actually just realized that my cup is perfect for this. It says all I need is coffee and the smell of salt air.
Oh yes, that's awesome. So tell us a little bit about you without too many spoilers, will you? Let's know who you are.
Yeah, I'm Jessica. Thanks for having me. I am in the U.S. And I'm an underwater archaeologist, and I've been diving for a long time, since 2007, I think. Um, and I kind of have just worked all over the place and done lots of different jobs, and done history stuff, archaeology stuff, environmental stuff, taught diving, not taught diving. So just kind of became a little jack of all trades in the archaeology world, but really focused. My passion is shipwrecks and transatlantic slave trade, ship construction, the Atlantic world, if you will. So.
Yeah. Is it all maritime stuff that you deal with now, or is it all aspects of archaeology within your work, but then your main interest is marine?
It ebbs and flows. So it was I was really, really focused on all maritime for a long time. I started out doing terrestrial, and working on plantations and working in the Caribbean. And then I transitioned to maritime, went to grad school for maritime, was really focused on that. And then started getting more involved in public history and a lot of activism work. And so then kind of transitioned a little bit more into education,
Yeah.
which took me to environmental stuff. And now I'm back, because of COVID, I've been able to really focus on maritime, the research side of it a little bit more.
Yeah.
Obviously not the diving because of, the world, but.
Yeah, it sucks, doesn't it? I was averaging about 100 dives a year. And then for the last year, I bet you I've not done, for the last, I bet almost 2 years now, I bet you I've not done 100 in the last 2 years.
See, you're way, way ahead of me, because I was averaging, Yeah, like about 100, depending on like what kind of projects and stuff we were doing, maybe a little bit more.
Yeah.
And then I started when my youngest daughter was born. I took like a year off of diving just because like it's just rough on your body, you know. And then
What is diving or
COVID.
having a kid?
Well, both like when you're like taking care of a kid and you're like not
Yeah.
sleeping and you have an infant and like then you're like yeah let's get up at 6 in the morning and like hit the waves.
Yeah.
um and then like so then yeah and then COVID hit, so it's been probably like almost 2 years since I've been in the water.
Yeah.
um did some topside support and stuff when I was pregnant, but it's not as fun watching people's bubbles as actually getting down in there, so.
Pretty grim, isn't it? So your husband's in the Marines, isn't he? Is he a pilot?
Yeah, actually, when I was listening to your podcast earlier, one of our really good friends is from he's from Sheffield, and you guys have a very similar accent. Yeah. But yes, my husband's a pilot, and so we've moved around a bunch too. I've got to like go to a lot of really cool places and work on a lot of different cool projects, but we've, I think we've moved like 11 times in 10 years. It's just like, it's nuts.
I don't know how you do it. You mustn't have many belongings or you get somebody to do it, because I swore when we moved into this house 3 years ago, I wouldn't move again. It's the most horrendous task ever on your own.
Yeah, the military does it for you.
Bravo.
Yeah. They get that one thing right.
About time, innit? So looking through your profile, certainly on Instagram, which is where I've we've chatted and stuff in the past, I come across one picture that I'm familiar with. It's the Salem Express in the Red Sea.
Hmm.
Talking about why certain shipwrecks aren't lifted or salvaged and stuff, because they can obviously dump oil, and probably graveyards, some of them, and stuff like that. Have you dived that? Have you been there?
I haven't been there. So my Instagram came about because like I have a personal Instagram with like kids and everything,
Yeah.
but my Instagram came about because I was like kind of getting a lot of messages and a lot of like requests about like my work. And when COVID hit and I was like trying to look for a way to just kind of do like a little bit more education about maritime history and maritime culture, and I just kind of started it, and I look at pictures of shipwrecks like all day every day. So I kind of like just put my favorite ones up there, the ones that I think are like the most compelling or interesting, and then try to like add a little like blurb about like why this is important or why this is different or how we do certain stuff. I think it's in my profession in underwater archaeology, people come to it two ways. They either start out as archaeologists and then learn to dive, or they're divers who are looking for a way to get paid to dive, right? So there's like, and so a lot of times we'll like when people are first starting out and they have a lot of diving experience, like, oh yeah, I saw this shipwreck and I saw this and I saw this and like, it was so cool. And I'm like, okay, but then like, what did you learn when you were there? And they're like, oh, it was just really beautiful. I'm like, yes, that is true. But what else? Like what else did you get from that? Like what else did that experience teach you? And so yeah, so I kind of like started the Instagram for that and have just been kind of like slowly growing it, in my free time. And hopefully soon I'll be able to put my own pictures up because I won't be stuck in lockdown.
I'd probably never thought about the orientation of some shipwrecks, because quite often they're not just sat nice and bolt upright, are they? Were if you get a little bit confused, you end up going down instead of up instead of down or whatever.
Well, and people get really excited too. So where I lived in Florida, in Pensacola, there's a purposely sunk aircraft carrier, and I think it's at like the deck is at like 150 feet. So for most people who are just diving like single tank recreation diver, like that's one of the deepest dives that they'll have ever done,
Yeah.
and they get down there and they get really excited and decide to like penetrate, and then like really horrible accidents happen because like they go in, they get disoriented, or they're not accounting for like depth and pressure, or they're new divers and they're just so excited to dive like this huge wreck. um there's also people out there who like they'll just dive and not leave anybody up on the boat, and then like you're like, okay, but you're not properly anchored, like so I see all these people who are so excited about shipwrecks, and I love them too. Like I get it when I see a shipwreck, like I get really excited, but you have to like think about your own safety. Like seeing the inside of the hull of a ship is like not worth your life, and also or your buddy's life. um And then if you haven't really like thought about what you're going to do and how you're going to go in and how you're going to come out, like you can on some of those like big shipwrecks like that, you get, I mean, if you go on a Navy vessel right now, like just at a museum, you get turned around and like lost in there. And then you like add the component of like diving, and it's just,
Yeah.
it can be really scary. So um, I try, when I was a dive instructor, safety obviously was like the most important
Yeah.
thing. And I think I've just kept that with me through all this time.
I do genuinely have a lust for rust, as they say. I think for the recreational diver that dives, certainly like local quarries near us, where there's shipwrecks put in, but they're not really ships. They're more boats and more pleasure boats at that. And they've already cut nice holes to go through them, or purposely sunk with big blue windows you can swim through. Everyone might come away from that thinking, I can dive wrecks. I'm a wreck diver now.
It's a maze and it changes like constantly. So, and a lot of times, like, depending on where you are in the world, obviously, like, a hurricane comes through, you dove that wreck before the hurricane, you come back after the hurricane, it's a totally different site, right? Like you don't know what's going to be washed up on there, what's going to have broken, what's going to have, disappeared. But the other thing is like let's say I go and dive it and I left my reel, like my pathway, and then you come in and don't realize it, or it's obscured, like, there's just like, you get tangled or your reel gets tangled and you get turned around, or our lines are the same color, like you can take a lot of those like cave diving principles and apply them to wreck penetration diving. um, but yeah, I think people just like get excited and they overestimate their abilities. I think we all do it. Like I've definitely dove in some situations that afterwards I was like, yeah, I probably should not have done that. Like high current, low visibility kind of stuff. We're like, oh, that probably wasn't the best idea. And so, it's different. But then the other thing that I have noticed happens a lot is really well known dives. Like, let's say you dove the same ship like 10 times and you're like, I know I turn right here because there's this like little piece of metal that's sticking out. But some diver yanks that off as like a souvenir and then it's gone. And then your like visual marker that you're relying on is like, okay. Or somebody has horrible trim and you're just like, now I'm in a cloud of dust and I can't see anything. There's just a lot that can go wrong. Um, and so like I'm like probably one of the least fun people to be on the top side with, where I'm like, this is what we're doing and this is where we're going, this is how we're going to do it. But then once you're in the water, you're like, okay, this is great. Like, it's less stress for me, at least when I know what the plan is.
I get that sort of attitude about it because I'm probably the most jovial, relaxed kind of person 90% of the time. I'm out of the water, and I sort of live by this mantra: it's not fun if you can't die, because everything we do is exciting, isn't it? And you've got a potential to die. I don't have no death wish. So when I introduced myself, hi, I'm Andy, to my first dive club, and I said, yeah, it's not fun if you can't die, is it? Everyone was like, ooh. But as soon as like my dive kit goes on, I'm as serious as it can be about safety and your security and your awareness of what's going on, and probably the first person to pull people up about trim and fin technique in places like that. If I can get in there, that's a problem. Getting in there, isn't it?
Yeah.
So tell us a bit more about your job then, because the only sort of archaeology I've come across is there's a program on the telly over here. It's called Time Team. It's been on since I was a little kid.
I love Time Team.
Yeah.
We watched it on Netflix like all the time. There was a Time Team America for like a minute, but it just wasn't the same. Like if you don't have Tony, like what's even the point,
But see, he's a strange person to present it, because I remember like sitcoms like Blackadder and things like that. He was always like the funniest bloke ever, and then all of a sudden he's being dead straight laced and serious, and you're like, what's this about? But cool guy.
Yeah. No, we love Time Team. I wish I could like, it's like a secret wish for me to like be on an episode of Time Team. That would like make my life. Yeah, my job is like, it's a little different every place I work. People, I know there's like an amazing graduate program in the UK at Southampton, and there's a lot of graduate programs out here. You generally, to get hired to do underwater and maritime archaeology, you do have to get a degree. You have to get a master's degree or higher. And so when you're in graduate school, it's like they focus a lot on like diving and dive technique and excavation and that kind of stuff, which is really fun. Like it's like really good time. You learn all this like crazy safety stuff and life-saving skills and all this, like, you get basically all of those certifications that you would get with like a recreation in like one compressed like class because you're doing it every day. Um, and then when you kind of get out into the world, a lot of what you're doing is kind of like compliance archaeology. So I don't get to dive for my job as much as I would necessarily like to. A lot of times I'm looking at like a remote sensing survey, so like side scan sonar or magnetometer of somebody who wants to like dredge a port or a harbor to see if there's any cultural resources there that we need to evaluate or protect or lift. Um, or, someone calls me because I used to work for the state of South Carolina. And so if someone finds a shipwreck, there's a lot of river divers there. They call, you come out, you evaluate it, try to kind of get a rough identification on it, decide like, hey, does this need to be preserved? Can we add it to like a heritage trail? Like what to do about it,
Yeah.
but also to kind of mark it so like it's at least documented. And and then I go into elementary schools and talk about why shipwrecks are cool and that. So it's like a different thing every day, but it's a little bit of like some diving, some remote sensing, some government stuff, some education stuff. And at the end of the day, you just have to remember like shipwrecks are cool and I love shipwrecks.
I don't want to get too political on this, but what's your view on like taking stuff off wrecks? Whether it be portals, the bell, artifacts, whatever it might be.
I mean, I generally have like a hard no policy on that. For a couple reasons. Like, if you enjoy diving it and you take it, then that's one little less bit of the ships that's there for like the next person to dive and to enjoy. And if every person who dove on the wreck took a piece of it, like, it would be gone. Um, a lot of times the things that are the easiest to take are the things that are like the most essential to identify like what ship that actually is. Um, and like I think the culture has like changed a lot from like the 70s where it was like mostly people who were like salvage treasure hunting to now people who are like a little bit more conservation minded. um but the other thing is like, yes, ships wreck all the time, right? Like there's always ships that are sinking, but now we make a more concerted effort to salvage them because we have the technology and ability to do it right away, and because they like pose a much more like substantial environmental threat. So now they're like, hey, that cruise ship that sank, what's it, the Costa Concordia is that, I think maybe, like they're like, okay, we got to pump all the oil off, we got to pump all like the sewage off, we got to cut it into pieces, we got to get all the plastic off, and so there's only so many ships in the historic record, and if we just souvenir them into our house, there won't be any more. But then also, do you really have the ability to make sure that that thing stays like once you bring it home? Like if you take a piece of wood off of a wooden shipwreck and you bring it in your house and you're just like, yeah, like, look, this is on my counter. Like in like 2 months, it's just going to be a pile of dust. If you, well, because it's been preserved in this environment, right? It's like cold, probably dark, probably anaerobic, which is why the wood is still there. Um, and then you take it out, and the first thing that's going to happen, it's going to dry out, right? And so, like when the wood dries out, it gets all crumbly. And then if it's not like in a kind of climate controlled space, it's just going to get crumbly until it's basically dust. And the same thing for a lot of metals. Like you take them out from this environment that they're happy in, or at least stable, right? They may not look pretty, but they're stable. And you take it out, and if it's salt water and you don't desalinify it and wash it and then like use electrolytic reduction to replace the molecules, like it's just going to rust and rust and rust sitting on your counter until it falls apart. So our policy, even when we're doing kind of like exploratory dives, like looking for new shipwrecks, is like we don't recover anything until we have a plan of how we're going to conserve that item. Um, a really good example is like I was working in South Carolina and these guys found a prehistoric canoe and they were super excited, right? So they're like, South Carolina is like marshy, mucky mud. So stuff preserves in there really well, but the second you get it out, it just starts kind of degrading. So they spent like all this time like digging it out and pulling it out. They're like, yay, look what we found. I'm like, well, I don't have an 18-foot tank to go like sit that thing in. And then like, I'm going to have to temperature control it and, to keep it looking the same way it does. Otherwise, it kind of just turns into this like broken pieces of shriveled up wood. Um, so, for a very long answer to your question, basically, I don't encourage people to take things from shipwrecks. I know that it is like an unavoidable thing that people get really excited about it, but at the very least, like if you enjoy diving a site, make sure that that site is still there for others to dive
Yeah,
behind you.
I totally agree. I often wondered. I forget. I want to say Victory, but I'm not sure if it's that. So someone will tell me I'm wrong. So I'll just pretend I think it's that. But HMS Victory was raised a few 20, 30 years ago, and it's into a museum now, just in bits. You can just see the sort of spines of it, and I'm sure they're spraying water all over that all the time, which must be why you're saying they're trying to stop the wood drying out and go into just
There's all kinds of different like preservation methods that people use. Like there's like a I can't remember the exact chemical composition name, but there's like a solution you can inject into the wood that's
yeah.
kind of like plastic. And basically, the idea is that the individual cells of the wood are inflated with water. That's why it's keeping its shape.
Hmm.
So when you take it out, if you can replace that water with this like other solution that's not going to just evaporate, then the wood can like maintain its structure. Um, there's different ways where people like they inject it or they soak it in that solution, or there's all these different experimental ways to preserve the wood. um, and then there's things like there's this shipwreck called the Cleopatra. It's in Mississippi. It was a Civil War wreck, and it sank, and it's complete, like it's 100%, like every single piece of it's there. So they pulled it up, but they just like set it on the bank, and then they put like a shade structure over it so it wouldn't get rained on, but then they didn't do anything else. So like you can go and see it, but it's maybe 50% of what was there 20 years ago when they pulled out, because it's just been, drying out and kind of like falling apart. So um and it's like a learning, like underwater archaeology really has only been around since like the 60s and 70s. So it's a relatively young field compared to other scientific disciplines.
It's funny you should say that about that one falling to bits over the last 20 years. That we watched something a couple of weeks ago. I think it was called Titanic Revisited or something like that. James Cameron had made it 20 years after the film, and he was showing they'd literally I think he's one of two people that's been back to it over a dozen times or something. And all the photographs, they put it together, and you can see how it's just collapsing under its own weight and just falling to bits. It's just crazy how people perhaps don't take that caution when they go diving on these wrecks, to think it is just an ever eroding structure that shouldn't be underwater, that's just getting eaten away, and how dangerous
Yeah,
it
and
is.
Titanic is an interesting case study too, though, because every time they put a sub on it, it's like a diver with bad trim. You know, it just kicks up all of this like sediment and stuff that was really like protecting it. Like every time they penetrate it with a sub, every single thing in there is getting moved around or pushed around, and that just amplifies the rate of decay. Um, and now with some of the like tourism stuff with that, where they're like, yeah, you can get married down there, you can pay all this money to like get in a sub and go see it. That's really cool. But every time a sub goes down there, it just, quickens the rate of decay for that ship, just by the nature of how things work in dark, cold, saltwater environments. So, but yeah, it's just little by little, it'll go.
They nicely steered around that on that film. They didn't tell you anything about they were destroying it. They were just there doing all this good, and they had this model that was pristine. I think it was from the film actually. And they were saying how they got the different camera angles. If you got a picture of a sub looking at the Titanic, it was always like done in the pool off this model, and the model was mega. And then they talked quite scientifically, about these. I think they were called iron fingers, were they maybe? Where there's like bits of droop
Mm-hmm.
coming off all the rails and stuff like that. That was like a new phenomenon that they'd never discovered what that was before. Probably snapped one off, didn't they, to find out what it was.
Yeah, I mean, they've been able to do a lot of really cool work on the Titanic. Part of the Titanic is super cool, but part of the thing that I hate about the Titanic is that I see like all this money and these resources and this like effort going towards the Titanic when there's like a million other like really cool and just as historically interesting shipwrecks out there that get like no money,
And half the
no,
depth, easier to get
yeah,
to.
yeah, exactly. And it's just, especially a lot of the ships that sank during World War II, like to me, those would be much more compelling to go take a look at than to go to Titanic for like the 55th time, you know?
Yeah. I've just got a job. Speaking of World War II, I've just got a job to go up to Scapa Flow in a couple of weeks
Nice.
to work on one of the boats that's going to be, the charter boats that go around there. And one interesting fact, I'm sure you know this, but they salvaged quite a lot of metals off those boats because they were all the pre-nuclear age, weren't they? So the metal or the steel doesn't have any, or have the similar sort of nuclear content. So if you're making surgical implements, like a false hip or something like that, they use them for that because there's less nuclear or radiation or radioactivity in that metal or something.
Yeah, I've heard about that. I haven't actually done any like work with that, but I have heard that. And I know there's like there's some people who really want to do like tests on that idea, like in Russia with because they're so one of my like favorite Instagram accounts right now is this photographer and she just like photographs all this crazy abandoned stuff in Russia. So like entire airfields, thousands of tanks, shipwrecks.
What's her
I've
name?
shared a couple. I can't remember her screen name off the top. I will
Oh,
send it to you so you
that
can put
much
it in
in
the
your
show notes.
favourite, you can't remember her name?
Well, it's Russian. I don't know how to say it, but
Go on, try.
I would have to look it up. I think it's like al al Aliglio, or it means like I think it means explorer or like undiscovered in Russian, but
Yeah,
I can send it to you.
yeah.
But yeah, so there's all this metal that's over there, and there's scientists who would love to like test it and see, like the composition, but Rush's like, nah, it's a no go.
Soft, isn't it? So talking about cool shipwrecks then, what is a cool one for you? What sort of I want to say what floats your boat? No pun intended.
um, I mean, so my primary research was on the ships involved in the transatlantic slave trade. So like my dream shipwreck to find would be a ship that like was purposely built to participate in that, um, like in that trade. And part of the problem is that there's a lot of ships that were used in it that were then repurposed for other stuff, and there's a lot of ships that were repurposed for like single voyages to and from Africa. um, the other issue with it is obviously like if a ship sank coming from Africa, there's like a good chance that that's a grave site. It went down with all the enslaved people on board probably. um, but it's just like a pretty big missing piece of the maritime historical record, is that there's these like millions of voyages that go back and forth in this trade, and we have like 6 shipwrecks that we have been able to identify. um, and most of them have been found by treasure hunters who like have just convinced themselves that any ship from that time has Spanish gold on it. Like forget the fact that there was only like ever like 3 Spanish treasure galleons that sank. Any shipwreck obviously had Spanish gold on it. So that's like my dream. That would be like my dream shipwreck to find, which would actually probably not be very exciting. It would be like wooden timbers under ballast stone with like associated artifacts.
Yeah.
Some of the really cool ones that I've dove on, I dove on the Housatonic, which is the ship that the Hunley sank. So the Hunley was the submarine during the Civil War. It's very famous. That was kind of like the first submarine to actually sink another ship. So they pulled up the Hunley and conserved it in Charleston, South Carolina, but the ship it sank is still there. And it just has like it's not a warship really. It just was kind of like had a bunch of like toothbrushes and women's clothing and stuff on it. But so that's a cool one. And then I did a bunch of work in Bermuda, and obviously the diving there is amazing. Um, and there's a lot of like really nice wrecks that you can dive on there, like as a tourist. So we got to do a dozen of those, and those were all really cool. And then the ship we worked on there, I really liked. It's a ship called the Enchantress, and what it was a ship that was coming at the beginning of the Irish potato famine, taking people to the United States. They got caught in a storm. They wrecked on the reef there. Um, Everyone pretty much survived. But then in the historic record, there's all these newspaper articles and like legal proceedings because the Bermuda government didn't want them, right? And then they had no money. They're refugees. The US didn't want to like pay to get them back over. So they just like sat in limbo in Bermuda for almost 2 years before they finally made it over to the United States. So the wreck is really pretty. It's like in the middle of this like basin of coral reef. It's all like really well preserved timbers. And the reason it's preserved is because there's all this iron plate on it, which they were apparently going to sell. Like it was iron that was manufactured in the UK that was going to be sold in the United States. And so it's just like beautiful parrotfish, beautiful shipwreck, nice clear water. Um, so yeah, but I mean, really any shipwreck that needs research is like my jam. I'm happy to jump on there.
Well, then that might be a good time.
Just quickly going to interrupt this interview for a word about our sponsors. So the Fancy a Brew podcast is supported by Dive Life Scuba Diving Centre, your one-stop shop for all the recreational and technical dive gear and training needs based out of the UK. They boast a 5-star service with their own in-house gas blending and equipment servicing department. Not only do they have the biggest well-known brands such as Halcyon, Santee, X-Deep and Fourth Element, but they're also helping to promote new and up-and-coming brands reach their full potential. With a long-standing instructional career, Ollie van Overbeek has developed a community of divers through his store's club memberships, offering fantastic discounts on trips and training and equipment. The team at Dive Life teaches everything from open water to advanced Trimix rebreather courses, or even if you want to become an instructor, no matter what your diving aim, they can help. So for more information, take a look at their website, divelife.co.uk, or find them on Instagram and Facebook. And for a 10% discount on internet sales, use promotional code ATND10 at the checkout. Unfortunately, this isn't usable on any already discounted products. So next time that you're looking around for training or kit, give Dive Life a click. And now let's get back onto this episode.
If somebody, just like, I don't know, somebody wanted to start looking into a particular shipwreck or a dot that they found, a blip on the sonar as they're traveling around, how would they start a research sort of program and try and work out what it was if it wasn't known, and obviously get the chance to dive in it eventually rather than just dropping in the water?
So I mean, there's so many factors that would depend, but like for this, let's just say like you're cruising, you see something come up on your fish that looks like a ship, it's like the right shape or whatever, throw in your kit, dive in the water, go check it out. Like it's a shipwreck, you found one. Um, the two kind of like important things to do first, if you're going to really try to like identify what it is to measure it, right? So measure the length and the width of it to like the best of your ability, because that'll help you narrow down like what shipwreck. And then take some like basic notes, like is it wood? Is it metal? Does it look really old? Does it look really new? Like how much marine life is on there? The next thing that I would do is I would contact any kind of like local historical society or archives like associated with the area that you're in. You're in Liverpool, right?
But not far from there, yeah.
Okay, so like it would be a little bit more complicated for you since that's like a major port for a really long time.
Yeah.
But you could like go to the historic society and be like, hey, I think I found a shipwreck. Like, do you have or know of a list of ships that sank around here? Or do you have like a archive or a finding aid for your historic documents that would say that specifies like shipwrecks or marine disasters or anything like that? And then you kind of just have to start looking. Like you start looking through and say, my ship was, this length. Okay, well, here's 10 ships that were this length. These 5 are made out of metal, these 5 are made out of wood, so we can eliminate the 5 made out of metal. Next I can look and see these 5 made out of wood. Okay, well, one sank in 1640, so it's probably not that one because it looked in better shape than that. And then like, okay, well, now I have 4 that it could be. And then kind of dive into a little bit more research on those 4. Like, are there newspaper articles? Are they listed in the Lloyd's Register? Are they, is there a captain associated with it? And then once you kind of like, you know what, like this one, it says it sank in a storm. There's no indication that there was an insurance claim on it or that anyone ever salvaged it. So I think it's probably this one. And then once you kind of narrow it down, then it's time to say, like, all right, can I reach out to an archaeologist or a research or anyone so that I can start to kind of maybe get the permissions to like pull up some artifacts or have them do an excavation. And I think the cool thing about most archaeologists is like they're really happy to include and keep the discoverer, or like we call them hobby divers, like the hobbyists, like on the project. Um, some of like the most amazing researchers that I know are people who are like, they retired and then they picked up diving as a hobby, and now they just like, they're like just so into it that they literally do the best research. They're like, they know so much information. And you know, like, yeah, they'll take you out on the boat with you probably, and they'll like keep you included. And um I know a lot of archaeologists will like, even like if they write a paper about it, they'll be like, yeah, come to this conference with me, or like they make them a
Yeah.
co-author, you know. Yeah, because like if someone is like, no, even though you found this, like it's mine now, like no one's ever going to share what they find anymore. You know, no one wants to be around anybody like that. And if the point of preserving history is to preserve it for everybody, then why would you try to hoard the knowledge, you
Yeah.
know? Um, so that's like a lot of steps, but you know, like using just kind of like critical thinking skills to like basic observations and then do some research. And maybe there is no written record, you know. That's when you kind of reach out to like the people with the fancy equipment, like, hey, I found this shipwreck, I think it's really old, do you know a dendrochronologist who could look at a wood sample for me?
Dendra
You know,
what?
like a dendrochronologist, it's somebody who looks at the tree rings of wood to basically date it. And they have these huge repositories of wood samples from all over the world.
Yeah.
And they can like break it down to like the year the tree was cut down, from what region of the world, the, you know, like where they think it was like harvested at. Um, and so it's really cool. And they can literally take like a 2-inch wood core and just be like, yeah, this was from, you know, the royal like woods in Charleston where there's really straight timber pine, and it was chopped down probably in 1740, and we know that they
Okay.
chopped this many trees down. And like it's just, it's really really cool. So when you find something, like there are people who are definitely experts who are like willing to be like, yeah. And there's probably like some lowly grad student out there like me, you just found their dream wreck. If you could find them, you'll make their life, their whole life happier.
So it's not just going trying to find the bell and hope it's there, hope no one else has had it away, and then you found it.
No, because then we wouldn't know anything about, you know, like Greek and Roman and Egyptian ships, and we wouldn't know anything about Viking ships. And, you know, there's so much maritime history from before the written record.
Yeah.
And it's also important to keep in mind that, like, what we think is important to write down, people in antiquity might not have cared about. A good example is like Roman cement, right?
Mm.
For for years they've been trying to figure out exactly like what is in Roman cement, like how they made it. But the Romans didn't write it down because they were like, duh, this is how you make cement. Like we don't need to write this down because like it's so obvious that this is how you do it. And here we are like hundreds of years later, like how did they do this? I joke that it's like if, you know, if you became the next prime minister or something, and then 100 years from now, someone's trying to like research your life, and they're like, oh, if only I had all of his like grocery receipts and his receipts from like, you know, I guess here we say like Walmart, but I don't know
Yeah.
what you guys have there. Like, but, you know, like I wish, and you're like, no, this is garbage. Like, why would I keep this receipt that says I bought like a dozen eggs and a gallon of milk? Um, but a historian could recreate like your entire life from that information. So like what we don't think is important could be really important to a historian later on.
Yeah.
And so it's just like a big puzzle piece. But yeah, I mean, a ship's bell is really nice, or something that says like, you know, this person was buried here is
Yeah.
great, but you rarely, rarely, rarely get anything like that.
How often do people find new wrecks though that are sort of big discoveries? Is it quite a rare thing or more regular?
Um, it's it's kind of a combination of both. People find new wrecks all the time. the question is if they're historically significant or not. You know, are they important enough or different enough to spend a lot of time, money, and energy researching? Um, so, you know, if you're like, I was working on a port project where they were gonna come in, they were gonna dredge out the entire port. You know, there was like some sunken barges, and there was like a sailboat that sank during a hurricane, and then there was a Civil War shipwreck. So they made a decision to just dredge through kind of like the barges and the sailboat, but then they spent a lot of money excavating and conserving the Civil War shipwreck. Um, and so that was really cool because they kind of knew it was there, but they didn't have an exact location. And then when they pulled it up, it had all this associated artifacts and construction information. Again, things that during the Civil War, like they didn't, you know, take the time to write down, like, this is how we built this boat, and this is what we used to make it, and this is who was on board, and this is what they brought. Um, and so that stuff can be really, really exciting. I think where it's kind of going is more the deep water stuff. I think a lot of the stuff that's like easily reachable by a diver has kind of been discovered. The stuff that is really challenging to get to in shallower water, like high current, dark water, really cold dynamic areas, is still like very much up for exploration. But you know, they're finding stuff now in, you know, deep, deep, deep ocean that you can only get to with submersibles. So
Yeah, I don't fancy that. Doesn't appeal to me at all. Dark water, no thanks. At night time, fine with that. But no, deep dark, nah, good thanks.
yeah, I know some people who like do a lot of work with rebreathers,
Yeah.
and so they're like working at like, you know, a lot deeper, and I'm just like it doesn't sound fun to me to spend like an hour on a descent and then an hour on an ascent just to work for like 25 minutes. You know, like it just doesn't. I'm
Well,
down for my like.
I'm quite new to rebreathers. I got one just before Christmas, but I'm limited to like 40 meters at the minute, and that's quite enough for me. I like that. You know, my wife can dive to that same depth on her. You know, she dives a twin sets or doubles. She can dive to there with me, and there's plenty of light. I can still get plenty of photographs. You know, that look all right, and video footage. But beyond that, that hour and a half coming back up, nah, I'm good.
There's some really good videos online too of people who like dive rebreathers, and they're like diving in like the Caribbean, and it's like nice and warm, and then like the deeper they get, they forget that it's going to be really cold. They're just like shivering, like. But I mean, they're a really awesome tool. Like, I think for a lot of people who dive for science, they look at their diving gear as like a tool to answer a question. And I will say that like the more time you spend doing, like using them as tools for your job, kind of like the less time you get to actually like go out and do it for fun, you know? So it just changes. But yeah, deep water is definitely, there's still tons of shipwrecks out there to find. Like we haven't explored the whole ocean.
There's a lot of it though, isn't there? That's probably why.
Yeah, and some of the really cool stuff is really hard to get to. Like I know that in terms of like World War II history, they don't focus as much on like the Pacific theater in the UK as they do here in the US. But I would love to go like to Wake Island or to Midway or to some of these like, you know, I know you had another guest who like that's all he does is like he does these like end of life trips, I think is what he called them.
Yeah.
Like going to Bikini Atoll is like huge bucket list item. Like I would love to, but they're so far out there, you know, like you have to get on 2 planes and then be on a boat for 4 days just to like get to the dive site. So there's some really cool stuff out there. It's just, again, it's not easily accessible for most people.
Just so much money in there that you can invest in for what would essentially just be a 2-week holiday, or probably not even that. You know,
they're like, here's $1 million to go on like 2-hour dives.
But it'd be kind of good, wouldn't it? I do think that one day that's got to happen. I've got to go out there because it's just so good. I mean, I've got a mate who's dived all of Bikini, and he's got all these. No, is it Bikini Atoll? No, Truck Lagoon. Sorry, he's dived all the Truck Lagoon, and he's for each of the dives he's got these cool little postcards, and he's had them framed all the way around, a map of it. So the picture's, a metre square perhaps. It's massive in one of his downstairs bathrooms. But he's got all these little cards for all the little shipwrecks, and there's obviously you can see the length of the beam, and just the mind boggles just how much money you can spend going diving and not really know enough about it when you get there. Just going on and just smiling and don't really learn much, which is a shame, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely see why people enjoy it. For me, like, I started diving as, a tool for archaeology. And then when I started teaching diving is when I was kind of like, you get more into that, like, it's peaceful and it's quiet and like like the moving a little slower than you do in kind of normal life and taking like a little bit of time to enjoy it. And as much as I'm like, yeah, this is on my bucket list and this is on my bucket list, I have some friends who are just like, they dive every day. It's just about like racking up the number of dives and like racking up the locations. I'm like, I don't, like, I want my dives to have a little bit more like intention than just like, yeah, I did 200 dives last year. Like I just knocked it out. I'm like, okay, but like, like you're just like would rather be underwater. Like that's awesome, but I want, like I want to dive with like a little bit more intention than that. So
fully agree with that. I just don't get 300 dives on the same one site is effectively one dive 300 times, isn't it? Rather than actually go and research something, go with a purpose to do something when you get there, get a particular photograph or create a particular set of footage or find an artifact or some marine life on it. That for me is where it's at.
When I was diving a lot, like because when I was teaching, I was diving pretty much every single day because I was like, I had an open water class and I had a scientific class and I was just like diving all the time. I like had to make a point like every like fifth dive just to like bring nothing with me, like no camera, no slate, like nothing extra, so that I could just like actually enjoy it. Because otherwise, you get bogged down with like the tasks. And then you kind of like maybe miss some of the like nuances of like what's cool. Like in the Pacific, there's like really great kelp bed diving, and it's like being in a huge forest. And if you're like, okay, I got to do this and I got to do that and I got to do that, or like, oh, I just want to dive here because it's like a destination, like you miss this amazing ecosystem that's like unique on our planet, and it's like being in a giant forest underwater. Like it's just really cool.
See, I've found the opposite to that. Since I got my camera about 18 months ago, I was the diver that got in, and I just wanted to go from A to B to C and so on really fast, and everyone was like, give me a load of grief for it because I'd be forever turning around trying to find out where they were, and I'd just be like plodding on with the dive. Right, I've been there, done that, and whatever. Now I've got a camera, I'm much slower, and I'm looking constantly for something, a change in texture or a change in color. And then when you find that, what is that? What's it doing there? And what's it doing? And right, let's try and pose it. Like, get a picture to take back to fill Instagram. So people, I don't ever think anyone's inspired by my photographs, but it'd be nice to think that people would go to a site that I've been to because I've taken a good photograph of that, and it was, a pleasure to go and dive that. So I think I'm a better diver and enjoy the dive now, and every dive has a purpose. Just so I've got my camera, rather than when I went in with nothing. I was tend to be the opposite. I was a crap diver. I was horrendous to be like a buddy with.
Yeah, I think definitely teaching diving changed my whole perspective of diving, because when you bring people, I call it the panic moment. Like when you transition from the pool to the ocean for the first time, there's like this second where like your student is descending and you just see their eyes get like huge when they like realize they're in the ocean. They're like, oh my gosh. And then they like kind of calm down and you're like, you're okay. Like you got this, these skills, like you can do this. And it just changes how you dive. You also notice things that like you wouldn't notice before, like, oh hey, like I need to make sure that person knows how to like fully empty their BCD a little bit better, because then when you see it like out when you're like doing a charter or something and somebody's really struggling, you're like, hey, like try dropping your weights a little bit, like try emptying your BCD a little bit more, and like you'll have better trim, it'll be so much more fun. And So I think those are the kind of tasks that have like taken over, as opposed to like going down with like line, chart, measuring tape, camera, and just being like, okay, this dive I'm going to achieve these 27 things, and then the next dive I got to achieve these 30 things. Um, in archaeology, we joke that like every dive costs like $10,000, right? Not because it actually costs that much, but because like you may never get the chance to go back to that site ever again. And so you may be the only person who has the ability to document that. And so if you don't open your camera lens when you're out there, you just wasted like your airfare out there, the boat trip, the gas, the tank fill, when you have like an objective. Whereas when you get to like dive for pleasure, like it's just not that like that intensity, like a purpose. It's a lot less.
You said before you taught scientific diving.
Mm-hmm.
What can you tell me about that? I don't know anything about
So in the United States, there's something called the Academy of Underwater Sciences. And basically what it is, it's a certification that you can get when you're associated with a university to participate in underwater scientific studies. And through this certification, you learn, it takes a semester. You normally complete like 25 to 30 dives in the course of getting this certification. Um, Half of it is safety and navigation, and the other half is like specialized skills. And the reason it's housed in universities, it's normally universities that have like a specific kind of research objective. And so you teach things to divers to be able to assist scientists who maybe don't want to dive, but still want to do experiments. So like one day might be like coral reef, like transplanting. So, you know, like there's this really specific kind of cement that they use and they hang them a certain way. One day might be like how to retrieve scientific experiments, how to document a shipwreck. And it's just like another intense level of training that's really focused on like when you're doing research underwater, you have more things that you need to think about and do to make sure that the experiments are, you know, carried out with the same kind of scientific rigor that they would be in a laboratory setting. So when I was in graduate school, one of the things that I did was completed that training and then started working towards my dive master. And in the course of working for my dive master, you end up teaching in the scientific class as well. So it's just another skill set to have. I mean, we did some crazy things. Like I had to dive the day after Hurricane Sandy, which was like a big one that hit the West Coast, to retrieve somebody's experiments because they got washed out and they wanted to try to still salvage some of the data. So, you know, like diving with like mattresses and stuff floating around in the water and trash and all that. But the scientists had been working on this project for like 2.5 years. And so they didn't want to lose that 2.5 years of research because a storm came in and blew their experiments out. So.
Well, I did, just after Christmas this year, I did what they call the HSE, so Health and Safety Executive. It used to be called the Part 4, but now it's like professional scuba. So you learn to use full face mask, comms and all that sort of stuff. So you're working underwater. And it was to tick boxes so you could work in media, scientific, archaeological and research. So I've tried, because it does interest me. Whilst I've got no history of doing it, I've certainly got no academic qualifications of doing it. But it does interest me if I could get involved with what you were just saying. You know, the scientist perhaps needs a buddy or a standby diver with them to assist, whatever that might be, holding up something or just being there in case it goes wrong. So I would really like to get involved in that, but finding something in the UK that takes such a layperson on board, you know, as support or whatever, it's pretty hard. So I'm not asking for a job, don't get me wrong, but just it'd be kind of interesting to get involved with that because of what's growing up watching Time Team and all that kind of thing, and then putting that alongside a hobby that I have with a passion. Quite interesting. Certainly finding Rex would be.
Yeah, I think you know, definitely reaching out to like scientists. Just like if you go on a university website, right, and you're like, this professor is studying this professor is studying this. If the university supports diving, which generally comes down to like insurance at the end of the day, there is normally some kind of like volunteer program or some kind of like volunteer ability. It also just depends on like what's going on and people's funding, kind of like what we were talking about before. We're like right now here, nothing is going on because everybody's grants got like canceled and postponed because of COVID. So this summer there's like nothing. But with archaeology, if you wanted to just be a land archaeologist, you go to field school. If you want to be an underwater archaeologist, it's the same thing. You go to field school. Field school does cost money, like you pay tuition and like your travel normally, but anybody can go. Like you can, if you meet the minimum qualifications, anybody can go. And so once you kind of have that experience and you kind of start getting into that network, um, you know, you'll see more and find out more. I know at least the underwater archaeology world is like a pretty small place. Like we kind of all know each other or know of each other. And like,
Yeah.
so when you hear about somebody doing something really cool, you know, somebody might like, I've volunteered on projects before and they're like, I have no money to pay you. And I'm like, well, I'm going to be in the area anyway. I'll be there for 2 days. Like, could you use an extra set of hands? And they're like, yeah, I really need somebody to just like, you know, make sure the pump doesn't turn off while I'm dredging and like stays topside. And like, yeah, that'd be great. I'm happy to do that. Or like, oh, I'm happy to be like your extra diver if we need to recover somebody, you know, like if somebody gets pulled out in the current. So there is, you know, there is opportunities to do that. I think you just really have to like seek them out.
Mm.
Because the other thing that happens, and it's how, you know, like I know you're a very like experienced diver, but the other thing that happens is like people get their open water certification, they've got 6 dives under their belt, they're in love, you know, they're in that first
Yeah.
like, I really love this stage, and they're like, yeah, I want to volunteer, I want to do this. And we're like, well, call me when you've got like 150 dives under your belt, like then we can talk about it. Because most people, you know, after they get their open water, they never dive again. That's like it. So, you know, you're like, I need to see your staying power before I like bring you onto my boat.
Yeah. I think with me trying to break into the market, whether it be media, scientific or research, or whatever, I think certainly for the first year, a lot of that will be what you just talked about, voluntary or very low pay for what it is. But by doing that, I think you establish yourself, don't you, as someone that's willing to work, willing to volunteer, willing to graft. I just don't want to be that person that's willing to do that for the next 20 years because I do want to make it pay for itself. It's quite costly, isn't it? Like you just said, you know, if you go to field school, there's a cost. If I went to dive school, that cost me as well. That rebreather certainly cost me an
Oh yeah.
awful lot of money. So there needs to be some reimbursement, although I'm not expecting it to be hundreds of thousands of pounds a year, but some remuneration would be good.
Yeah, I think when people have money, they're willing to pay people to participate. I think a lot of times though, like in the sciences and in like the arts, like, you know, there just isn't the money there. You know, like we joke, and I know that there's archaeologists in the UK are going through like a very similar thing, um, where we're like, yeah, they want you to have 10 years of experience and have been a PI and have all this stuff, and you know, but then they're only willing to pay you minimum wage. You're like, well, no, like, you know, I'm a lot different than a lot of my colleagues because like I have children and I can't travel 200 days out of the year. And, you know, I can't take these jobs that are like, oh, yeah, we need you here for 3 weeks and then you're not going to have a job. And then you can start applying for other jobs and you'll be there for 6 weeks. You know, like I'm just not in a place in life that I can do that. And so, in my experience, it's like when people have money, they're happy to pay you. It's in the in between times when they're like, hey, but the nice thing is like the more experience you get, the things you're really passionate about, you'll volunteer for. And the things you're like, I don't want to do that, you can pay me. You know? So like I'm happy to volunteer to go down to the Bahamas and dive down there. But if you want me to dive like where I'm pretty close to DC where I'm at right now, if you want me to dive in the Chesapeake, whew, you better come at me with some like hazard pay.
Well, that's what my wife was talking about just before you came on. Going, this job I've got in Scapa Flow, he isn't going to pay a fortune. And to be fair, I hope he doesn't listen. I probably won't put this out before I go up there, but I probably would go and do it for free because not only do I get the experience of going up there and being able to dive it, take my camera in and experience all that, I'm actually going working on his boat. So for me, getting the experience of being on a boat, which is kind of what my future holds, and then going diving Scapa Flow, and someone's going to pay me for being there, and all I've got to do is put a bit of a graft, you know, do a bit of a shift. It's not really that hard, is it? Whereas last week I was diving in a swimming pool, pulling tiles off the wall that are broken and fixing them, and that was boring as sin, you know. mind-numbingly boring. So
Yeah, a lot of my old timer friends, like the guys who've been doing this since like the 70s, are like, I had to scrape boats for like 3 summers to like, get enough dives in. I'm like, yeah, I don't want to scrape mussels off boats.
no, I think there's a line into where you cross, but I do agree. You volunteer for the stuff you love, and hopefully you'll get some kickback off that, and then jobs will pay, won't they, eventually? But just getting your name out there, innit, and building up that rapport and getting references and letting people know who you are and that you're happy to work. I think that'll pay dividends in the long run.
Every like real job that I have had in the past 10 years, I started out volunteering in some capacity. Um, and then just built my network. Like I volunteered for 3 weeks before I got hired in South Carolina. I volunteered at a museum when we were living in Florida for 3.5 months before I got hired. And obviously that's like an incredibly privileged position to be in where, like I didn't necessarily like, I had a spouse who had a stable income, so I was able to do that. But I know how many applications they were getting across their desk, but because I had like built those relationships and they recognized my name and they knew that I had a good work ethic, that kind of translates into being employable. Especially in kind of like the diving industry, like when you know a diver, when you know that they're going to be safe, they're going to be reliable, they're going to be dependable, they have a good work ethic, like it just it'll come back around. Because we've all been on boats with people who are hungover or who are like treat every dive like a vacation, and you're like, you're not always here. It's fun, and we're really lucky to get to do this as part of our jobs, but like not every dive is a vacation, and you have to find the divers who are willing to like get in the cold water on the days that they don't want to, as well as on the days when you're going to do something amazing.
I had to Google it when you were talking before, when you were saying about how you're looking at your sort of main interest, if you will, what gets you excited to be like slave ships from the slave trade and stuff. Did you ever watch, I don't know if you'd have got it over in the US, but the BBC did a sort of series called Enslaved, and it was with Samuel L. Jackson last year.
Yeah, so I have watched it, and a few of my colleagues are in it. Yeah, Justin, and he's like an underwater archaeologist from here. And I haven't done a lot of work with the Slave Wrecks Project, but the Society for Black Archaeologists and the Black Scuba Divers Association, like I have done some work with them, and a lot of them are in it. So that's like a really amazing project that I'm so glad has gotten off and is like getting a lot more screen time. When I started studying it, every place I went, they were like, what you're talking about is nonsense. I'm like, what do you mean? And because my research went out to prove that like people built ships specifically to work in the transatlantic slave trade. And every archivist and every historian I talked to would be like, no, every ship was repurposed, no one purposely built. And then I did a bunch of work in Rhode Island and Newport because that was like a major hub. First day in the archives, found like 20 documents. Then I hopped over to Liverpool and I was there looking at the archives there. And I'm like, I don't know. Like, I don't think there's going to be anything here. First day, tons of stuff. So, like what I did was just like a little tiny itty bitty thing, like for compared to like the massive of this topic. But that project has brought like so much light and interest into the study of the transatlantic slave trade. I'm really, really excited for those guys and like the doors that have been opening, and like just like their work getting highlighted is awesome because it has been like pushed to the side for a really long time. So it's a great documentary. Everyone should watch it. I know it's hard to get in certain places and they keep changing like what streaming service it's on and stuff, but it's a really good one.
But it was good for me, not only because there's two people that I've worked with are on that as well. So my rebreather instructor was on there. He was one of the divers that went down, and was it a mammoth tusk or a narwhal tusk? I forget which one they found.
I think it was a mammoth.
Yeah. And then the guy that was kind of running the diving operations, I've hopefully got a job with him on Monday, doing some more like media film stuff, which would be flipping brilliant for me to get just a chance opportunity at one day with him, local to us, Manchester as well. That'd be cool. That'd be pretty good. So we shall see.
Yeah, right before the pandemic, I was talking to some folks over there who were looking to do like a whole series about the D-Day anniversary and World War II and all this stuff, and I was pretty excited about it, and then it all just like blew away with the wind.
Well, I tell you
But
what, if you ever end up coming over here doing something, you'll have to give me a shout, because I'll be a brew boy. If nothing else, I'll get the tea and coffees
all
in.
right, I'm gonna hold you to that, because like in the next couple of years, I have another big project that I really want to do, and I've been kind of waiting till all this settles down to start like really applying for money for it and stuff. But there's some British shipwrecks, kind of like closer off the coast of Africa in really deep water, that they may be on like submerged kind of like volcanic structures. They might actually be diveable that I want to go look at. So that would be really cool. But when I come out there, hopefully someday when England decides to let us all back in, all us horribly, Americans over here that can't take this virus seriously, when we can come back, I'll hit you up, because we love it over there. Like if I had a way to live over there for like a while, I would totally do it.
Right, mate. Well, have a nice. What have you got left? 35 minutes left at work to do all your emails now.
Yeah.
Treat yourself.
Like 50 emails I just saw. All right.
Right. Take it easy, mate. I'll speak to you soon when it's ready to come out, and we'll be in touch.
Awesome. Well, have a good night.
You too, mate. Take it easy. See you later.
Bye.
Love you. Bye.
So that brings us to the end of the episode, and I hope you've enjoyed this week's guest enough to subscribe to the Fancy a Brew podcast and leave us a 5-star review wherever you download your podcasts. Don't forget to take a look at Dive Life's website and social media channels, as they always have some great deals available, and you can use promo code ATND10 at the checkout to get some money off any non-discounted items. For more information on this episode, take a look at the description or follow us on Instagram for all the latest news and upcoming releases. Thanks for listening. I'll see you on the next one.